Welcome everyone to our first hybrid meeting for the Monomoy Regional School Committee. It's Thursday, August 20th at 6:40. And I think we may have to do a roll call because we've got a couple of school committee members in the Zoom room. So let's just go around and say our name in the Zoom room. Sharon and Joe, if you could just say your name and say present.
Sharon Stout, present.
Thank you. Joe, can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
All right, Joe's here. And let's just go around the table.
Meredith Henderson, present.
Nancy Scott, present.
Terry Russell, present.
And Tina Games, present. And the first item on our agenda is the approval of minutes for August 6th. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, so Nancy made the motion, Terry seconded, and I guess we have to do a roll call again. So we're going to start in the Zoom room, and this is for approval of minutes. First of all, any discussion? All right, so we're approving the minutes. Sharon, aye or nay? Oh, can you unmute yourself to approve the minutes?
Aye.
Thank you. Joe?
Aye.
And we'll go around the table. Meredith?
Aye.
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So the minutes for August 6th pass. And now public comment. Do we have anyone from the public who would like to speak? Anyone in the Zoom room here who would like to speak? All right, so we're going to move on to recognitions. Dr. Carpenter?
I have a few here. So for our recognitions, we would like to thank Holly Thing, our data specialist, who admirably met the Herculean task of sorting, cleaning, and analyzing the data received from our school year's model selection form that parents needed to fill out this past week, ensuring that every student in our schools is appropriately coded in our student information system for the model learning that the family has selected this year. This was a lot of work for Holly and very important for us to go and launch the upcoming school year. We'd like to thank the tremendous efforts of our custodial staff who were the ones transporting the meals this summer from Nauset Middle School to both the Monomoy Regional Middle School and Monomoy Regional High School. They did this every morning for the Foods for Kids program. So special thanks to Rihanna Caviano, Peter Fogg, Pat Senior, Dylan Picnic, Chris Johnson, Chuck Potter, Ed Waugh, and John Larson. On behalf of the elementary school, of Chatham Elementary School, Principal Robin Millen would like to thank the following. Cape Fisherman Supply for donating $242 worth of rope for their walking ropes. Ann and Peter Bernard for donating 1,000 brown bags for the food pantry, and a $100 anonymous donation for the Lighthouse Fund at Chatham Elementary. Miss Betty Eldridge donated slippers and school supplies and other items for students. The Chatham COVID Fund donated $4,522.53, especially Stephen Daniels, the Oppenheimers, Jen Mentzler, Shane Coughlin, Lower Cape Outreach, and the Wayside Inn for continued partnership in these efforts. The pantry provided food and resources to almost 100 children and their families to cover 2 weeks twice this month. The Freemasons of Chatham and the Chatham Children's Fund for their donations. The Masons donated water bottles for all Chatham Elementary students. They made the donation as a result of the need to close the school's water bubblers. The Children's Fund donated 60 backpacks filled with school supplies and lunch boxes for students. And lastly, Let's see, we have Maui Gold for donating 100 masks for students. And thanks to the School to Careers for their grant of $2,200. The Monomoy Early Childhood Council for kindergarten readiness kits distributed at both Chatham Elementary and Harwich Elementary. We'd like to thank them for providing in those kits magnetic dry erase boards, colored and white paper, rubber ball, craft sticks, glue stick, painter's tape, magnetic pattern blocks, foam dice, activity ideas with learning objectives, dry erase markers, colored markers, scissors, tweezers, measuring tape, pom-poms, pencils, and books. So thank you to all for your support for our students in schools.
Wow, thank you. Any questions or comments for the superintendent? Any from the Zoom room? All right, so moving on to reports and discussions, the strategic plan update, which is presented by Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. Welcome, Mark.
Good evening, Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. I drew the short straw to be the first person to test giving a presentation in this hybrid environment. So we are going to see how this works. All right, so if I did everything right, we should be able to see the presentation both at home and here in the room. If either Sharon or Joe, you can't see it, just please let me know and I will try again. So I'm here today to give an update to the strategic plan to the committee. It says year one progress. It's really more about 18 months since we sort of started about halfway through the 18-19 school year. And I just want to sort of frame the presentation a little bit. I really wanted to sort of give a high-level look at our work working on the strategic plan, and I sort of focused at the objective level when we have 4 strategic objectives, and I'm going to talk us through that in just a minute. And so we may not see every single thing that we accomplished this year, and I'm really trying to respect the very sort of dense agenda items that you guys have been sort of dealing with as a school committee and the length of some of the meetings. So I really did try to sort of keep it at the objective level. But if people have specific questions when we get to the end about specific things, so I'm not going to sort of go action step by action step through the plan. I'm sort of, like I said, giving a high-level look, which focuses on each of the 4 objectives. And I focused on things that we did really district-wide versus some things that we may have done at specific buildings and at specific times. But again, I'm happy to go into detail in anything that people have specific questions about. So just as a reminder, both for the committee and for the public, we have 4 strategic objectives as a district that came out of our strategic plan. Our first strategic objective was to expand community engagement and partnerships. And we're going to do this by focusing on families' equity of access, and we're looking to increase community involvement and further embed service learning within our curriculum. Our second objective focuses on strengthening social and emotional well-being, doing this through a deliberate focus on the development of health and supportive relationships and fully integrating social emotional learning curriculum. Our third objective was focused on closing the achievement gap, doing this by developing and implementing targeted instruction and supports that improve outcomes for the largest and most persistent achievement gaps. And then last, our fourth strategic objective focuses on improving curriculum instruction and assessment for all learners. And we aim to do this by ensuring our collective practices are focused on students, and by preparing them for college, career, and life as members of both our local and global community. So, as you may remember, and for honestly, it doesn't really matter. So last summer, when things were more normal than they were this summer, we spent our administrative retreat, at that point, we had had the strategic plan sort of in place for about 4 months, or it had been completed for about 4 months. And we really took our administrative retreat to dig into that and establish what were the things that we're going to focus on across all 4 schools, and we're going to be something that we're going to be sort of our broad messages that we're going to communicate out to faculty. And we established 4 overarching sort of action items for year 1 based upon everything that was in the strategic plan. We wanted something that was digestible for staff, that was something that we could stay on top of and monitor and throughout the school year. And we presented that to the school committee coming out of that summer, so about this time last year. And so I framed this presentation around those pieces that I presented at that time. So I'm going to take them one at a time, and you'll see a common pattern here. On the left, you'll see the goals that we established coming out of those 4 days of meetings. I'm going to give you a sense of the progress that we've made towards those. And then the next slide, we'll talk about some of the planned next steps with a caveat that I'll get to at the very end. So as a reminder, for our first strategic objective, we came up with 4 broad goals to accomplish as a district, which was for each of our schools, we determined as a leadership team that we felt if we were going to be working with families that we were struggling to engage into our school community, instead of us sitting in a room trying to brainstorm, it was best for us to reach out to those families that we were having a difficult time engaging and finding out how we could best support them. Our second piece was to expand cultural proficiency for our staff, which was through professional development. And then the last was to track family participation at the school, at school-wide events. So we determined that would be a curriculum night, parent-teacher conference, and then there'd be one other non-academic event at the school's discretion. So progress, our first goal got disrupted by COVID. We had several plans in place for the spring that obviously got significantly impacted by schools closing on March 13th, or that was our last day. We didn't come back after March 13th. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what our next steps are, because we've shifted a little bit in what we're going to try for an approach going into this school year to recapture that and be able to move forward. Second, the cultural proficiency, we were able to get the training in. We started at the first full day professional day, which was the Friday before Columbus Day weekend, with our teaching staff, and we used an outside presenter, Dr. Khalees Warnham, who came in and gave cultural proficiency training for all staff. That was then followed up with trainings on 2 different dates, because that isn't a work day for our paraprofessional staff. So we then found other times in the year to bring her back, once for the elementary and middle school paraprofessional staff, and then another time for the high school paraprofessional staff. So by January, I forget the exact date in January, we'd had everybody go through that training. Additionally, I developed a training that sort of went next steps, and I'd gotten to the middle school and HES to do that training before we found ourselves in this new reality that we find ourselves in. And then for the family participation, we started to establish some baseline data. We have a lot of baseline data collected, but we also didn't get through some of the activities that we planned to collect data around were scheduled for the spring. So while we did have curriculum night and our first round of parent-teacher conferences, we weren't able to fully round things out because we were disrupted by COVID. But we do have a nice sort of bit of baseline data to start from, and we disaggregate. You know, it was part of our conversation was to collect that data in a way that was disaggregated. So for next steps, I think I've mentioned to the committee before, and it's sort of buried in our reopening plan a little bit, but we are planning to launch an equity task force. And I actually have, Steve actually helped me record something, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago at this time. I've worked with Joy to work on a sort of a press release to go out to our students, staff, and to our community as well, caregivers and beyond. And we're looking to really establish a task force that can help lead this work for us as a district. And we're really just waiting on timing. As you can imagine, parents are getting inundated with a lot of information. Our students are getting inundated with a lot of information. And we didn't want to send this out at the same time we were asking people to make decisions on what model they were going to be enrolling their children in. So Joy and I have had a conversation. We're thinking that next week will be a nice time to send sort of this recruitment information out, unless something else comes up. Fingers crossed, but that's the plan as of today. Another piece that we have talked about to support families is we do have a lot of native features in our website that allow for translation, and that's a sort of a fairly significant barrier for us in that we are not fast and efficient at being able to translate documents going out. Partly is because we have, I think it's upwards of 15 or 16 different languages at this point at low incidence. We might, for example, we have 1 or 2 families that speak Korean, 1 or 2 families that speak Bulgarian, and that goes on and on and on. We don't sort of have another district might have a lot of families that speak either Portuguese or Spanish. We have 1 or 2 of each. But the website we've been working, Joy and I have been working together to sort of the process in which we're putting information out drives people back to the website, which has within it, so like the superintendent's messages are getting posted to the website and people are sort of being directed there to read them. And that's because inside the website are translation features, and you can translate it into your native language. Sort of the next step in that is making sure that people understand that that's actually like available to them, and that's a tool. So that's part of our plans for this coming year. So it gets sort of like a training piece. And then that last bullet's a little vague, but we're going to let the task force establish some specific action items for us as a group, for us to move forward. Strategic Objective 2, one of the things that we established, if you remember in the language for the Strategic Objective 2, it's a high emphasis on relationships. So we wanted to look for ways to measure this as an outcome. So we have 2 specific data points that we established. One was already in place, and both were already in place in some context. So one we broadened across the district, and the second we determined we were going to focus on a specific portion of that information. So we did develop a common survey question, which you can see the question there. We actually ultimately ended up making very little adjustments for the elementary schools. We ultimately decided to do this 3rd grade through 12th grade. So after some conversation, the 3rd and 4th grade, we felt this was language that was accessible to 3rd and 4th graders. And so ultimately, we were able to put this survey in place in 3 out of the 4 schools. I'll show you the data on the next slide. And then we also utilized an existing SEL survey, which Melissa has been doing a lot of work with her contact at the Department of Ed, Sheila Peoples, on really actually developing this from scratch, which is tied back to our Castle 5, which she's presented to the school committee around multiple times. And I have data to show there, and I'm actually gonna have her come up because she's the expert in this, and I'm just gonna ask her to speak to those specific data pieces. So if we look for the strategic objective, you can see, so the blue represents students who answered yes to this question, which was, again, in our school, are there staff members who show you warmth, understanding, respect, and interest so that you're comfortable sharing your personal problems or concerns with them? So you can see 90% or higher of our students across the 3 schools, from Chatham Elementary, Harwich Elementary School, and the middle school reported yes. Again, I mentioned one of the schools we weren't able to get the survey done. And so that's for a baseline piece. I think that's a pretty solid place to start from. We obviously have some students we need to address, and we have some other ways to look at this data, which I will address in the next steps in just a second. Then I'm going to ask Melissa to come up and just speak to the other bits of data that we have.
Good evening, Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. Just a little more context for how we developed the survey. we had started 3 years ago with a survey that we administered to students once, and then we looked at it and decided we needed to probably do it more than once. And then all of the work that we've done with Excel Network and the social emotional learning brought the attention of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed and the research department. So we partnered with them and refined the survey to ensure it was reliable and valid in the responses. And we did that with a fairly large group in the state to look at all of the items and the importance of the items and how students would respond. So just a little context, so then 2 years ago, we administered the new survey, minus the middle school. There was a little quirkiness with the middle school survey, but that's okay, they get on board after. And then what happens is Sheila takes all of those data and she does an incredible data analysis. She just gave us a 25-page report on our data for the past several years. So, and with that, she creates what's called a SWAN map for students. So the students have a map that shows what their strengths are, what their areas for growth are, what their opportunities are to build upon these social emotional learning skills. So that's kind of a little bit of background on that survey. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the data. And I know it looks confusing, and I think that at some point in the future we'll do a little bit more in depth of what this looks like. So all of these lines represent one of the 5 core competencies of social emotional learning. So for example, RDM is relationship skills, it's responsible decision making. RSK is relationship skills. SA is self-awareness. SM is self-management. And SOC is social skills. So what happens is these data are represented from 2018 when we did our first administration with DESE doing the data analysis to 2020. Now for the elementary school, there has been a little bit of decline in how students respond to their feelings about each of the questions on these social emotional learning scales. What's important to understand is that the same questions are asked of a 3rd grader that are asked of a 12th grader, and that's purposeful. Because what I understand that question as a 3rd grader is very different in my world today than when I'm a 12th grader, and how I grow and develop and interpret the question. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that we see some of the scores go down a little bit, because as kids get older, they might understand the question better and respond that, that's really hard for me. And that's how they're responding. Is it easy? Is it hard? And there's kind of a scale. So it's not a bad thing because they're becoming more self-aware. So there was a little bit of decline in the elementary school. And in this year, we did not do the survey in the spring for the elementary school. We only did it for the middle and the high school, purposefully, because there was a lot going on. And we didn't obviously have the kids in school to support them in the administration. At the middle school, what's really nice, and mind you, we're tracking, these scores are anchored, which means the score is compared to your response last year. So all of these scores, we are able to track a student's response and growth over time. So what's really nice about the middle school data are these students have grown, as you can see, pretty nicely. And particularly in the relationship skill domain, and it really ties into the fact that we have really focused on relationship skills as our priority. So you can see a really nice data trend for the students that they're increasing those skills. And even this year in 2020, with kids being out of school, there wasn't a huge decline. So that was really encouraging, especially with the self-awareness. If you notice, it's that top yellow line. That trend has been going up. So that's really positive. And the social skills, which is the red line, look, that's made a huge jump. So we're really, really positively looking at the skills that kids are gaining from the work that's being done. And then the last group is the high school group. So as you can see, with our high school students, there's been a decline from the first administration, and it kind of flatlined out. And then, interestingly enough, this past year, there's been a little bit of an increase in the self-management, which is, I find fascinating, because kids were required to do something that they were never asked to do before, which was to manage their time, manage their emotions more with not being in school. So I find that that's an interesting response. And then, of course, if you notice the orange line, for the social skills part, that kids didn't have opportunity for social opportunities. So these data are reflective, I think, of where the kids were what they were feeling at the time of school closure, because we did it in May. And so I think we had a decent representation. Seniors weren't here, so they did not take it, so it's not the full student body. And of course, the same number of students didn't take it as they did in the fall, because we were administering it and asking them to take it at home. So when we look at these data, it certainly tells a story. Sure.
Quick question. The colors are blowing my mind. So is the SM, is that red or orange?
That, no, oh, you know what? That's red. The self-management is
So
red.
self-management is red and social is orange?
Is orange. No, yes, is orange, and self-awareness is yellow. And then relationship skills are blue. And then
So,
responsible decision-making is green.
so SM is red and SOC is
Social.
orange.
That looks
No. Yeah, that's,
kind of pink.
because you were talking, and the reason I'm asking is because you were saying that the social was going down, right?
So the self-management went up.
So that means it's red.
Correct.
So SM is red.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the social's orange?
Yes.
Okay.
And yet, right, and yellow is self-awareness. So
Thank you, I'm sorry.
that's okay. I might have to ask her to tweak the colors a little bit on actually, there's a computer program that we now have, and she's gonna train us on, that actually does all this, which is really cool. So just some other interesting data. If we look at the data with students with disabilities and students without disability, overall, there was, an increase of students with disability overall. Those data aren't on here. It's just I could go on this, and you know that, right? But I thought it was interesting. So there was definitely an increase in their overall rating of their 5 competencies in the past year, so that was good. Female versus male, definitely there's an increase in positive responses from females over males. Not tremendous, so I was pleased to see it. It's only a few data points, but still important to look at. Very little difference, not marginal on race in terms of response of white and versus non-white. Suspension data, that was really interesting. There was a pretty big variable on students who were suspended and their responses to those 5 core competencies. So something we really want to pay attention to. We're doing that with our behavioral health committee, is looking at how are we relooking at discipline, redefining discipline, and responding to discipline. So I thought that was important. And then just moving forward, this is new. I haven't even told Dr. Carpenter yet, but this past week, the University of Illinois invited us to the table. They're writing a 2-year grant, a national grant. We're one of 3 school districts in the country that have been asked to participate in this grant, and the other district is Taunton, who I've actually gone and done their training for the social emotional learning, which is nice. And Washoe County, which is in California, they've been doing this for 10 years. I was researching what they were doing well before I came here. So that's really exciting news. And we're also, we're asked, as members of the Excel network, but we were also asked to join a kind of a think tank in addition to Excel in the state. So that was really exciting. And then, of course, our work with Transforming Ed and our rollout of the, I find it really hard to talk with this. Our rollout of integrating social emotional learning across the curriculum. So anyway, those are all the things that we're doing and more. Oh,
So
sorry.
that you don't have to keep getting up and down, let me just, anybody on what Melissa has presented have any questions, so we don't have to get her up and down? Any school committee members? Joe or Sharon, do either of you have comments or questions in this part?
Thanks for asking, but no, not at this time.
Okay. All right, good.
All right.
Oh, actually, sorry, I do have a quick question. So in the three, how did we get selected? So how did we get picked for that?
The work we're doing, and the department, of course, they went to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed to seek recommendations. So we were the recommended district to participate. So, and that will be a hefty dollar amount coming to us to do the work with them when they get that grant. So
That's
it's
fantastic.
exciting.
All right, thank you.
And just enough, the commissioner has asked the research department to push out a grant seeking other districts in the state to do what we're doing. And in that proposal, Monomoy is being asked to be the mentors for that grant to other districts. So,
Wow, that's impressive.
yeah, we're doing some good stuff.
Great, thank you,
That's great.
Melissa. All right, I guess it's back to Mark.
I have a question
Oh.
for her.
Oh,
I don't
Sharon
have to
has a
raise my
question.
hand.
All right, hold on one second, Sharon. Let her get right back to the mic. Go ahead with your question.
A simple question, Melissa. This data information here is very interesting to me. Is there any way that I could get a copy with the actual words on it so I know what SM means and those type of things?
Yeah, I'm happy to actually we can share the full report. What I would love to do is, in the future meeting, actually do a little deeper dive into the work, because we just don't have enough time tonight, but happy to share the report.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in addition to what Melissa mentioned, moving forward, we're going to ensure we complete that relationship survey across all schools. And then, as I mentioned, we had 90% of our students or better in each of the schools answer yes to the one question. But the next step is to disaggregate that data and analyze to see if there's any disproportionality in representation. So, if 9% of students report no, is there an overrepresentation of any of our student populations in that particular group? So that's sort of a next piece. And then Melissa spoke to the continuing partnerships and beyond that we have, both through the survey and beyond. Third strategic objective is around the achievement gap. And we determined last year, sort of from a public position, one of the first things that we really needed to do was to let our data drive the moral imperative. So we spent a lot of time disaggregating district level data. So for example, and I presented to the school committee, we took our MCAS data and we disaggregated that along lines that Melissa referenced just a few minutes ago, male, female, across white, non-white, English learners versus non-English learners, special education, non-special education, et cetera. And publicly presented that not only here, but to our faculty and staff so that they could see the achievement gaps that do exist here in Monomoy. It isn't just, because I think I've mentioned before, when we get our reporting back from the state, none of our groups, our subgroups are large enough for us to get sort of it shown to us that way. So we had to work with the partner that allowed us to match our demographic data to student ID to their scores and allowed us to really make visible things that were invisible to us. Additionally, we looked at things like AP enrollment. We looked at things like honors enrollment at the high school. We looked at our honors recognitions that happen at the different schools. We did both a quantitative analysis of those and a qualitative analysis, sort of like pulling as an admin team. We sat and looked at pictures from those events and was it really representative of our entire student population, or was there only certain portions of our population that were represented. And that's led to us, rethinking some ways that we do particular things, especially around awards and recognition. And I'll speak a little bit to some of the pieces around honors and AP enrollment in just a second. So I mentioned we've shared that publicly, and part of this action step was to develop to provide the district level PD on cultural proficiency. So here you can see a tight connection between strategic objective 3 and strategic objective 1. So it was the same PD, but it hit two strategic objectives. And then we had another caveat to this, which was to really try to support beyond the walls of Monomoy, to really try to dissolve some of the barriers in the town that might be ultimately sort of playing out in the schools where students access to extracurricular activities. This really looked to be a partnership, for example, with our recreation programs. And again, plans for this were set to really kick off in the spring, and were derailed by COVID. So next steps for strategic objective 3, the admin team, we actually were really, to be fully honest, set to do this summer. Just with everything that happened and every other bit of planning we had to do, we actually just postponed. But we're all going to be, all the administrators have, and we're going to be doing an admin read around this text, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. And so that'll be helping build our capacity as an administrative team. As a side note, that book was also offered to our faculty. We always do a staff read in the summer for people, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in a minute, but that was one of the titles that was offered and that the district provided. And then, so getting into the AP honors enrollment, and talking with Principal Police, I know she has plans, and we're working together to develop a data task force specifically at the high school. And she wants to extend further beyond the data that we've looked at. She wants to look at post-high school data, and she wants to dig deeper into the CP honors and AP data in order to make changes, specifically starting as students are entering the high school, and changing trajectory for students so that we don't have some of the problems that we see, which is, by example, the high school is 78% white, but our AP enrollment is over 90% white. So there's definitely a discrepancy there that doesn't start just when kids are applying for AP, right, or deciding to take AP. So we need to walk that back a little bit. And actually the reality is probably walks back for before they get into the high school altogether. And then, as I mentioned, the District Equity Task Force is also going to be a big driver. This team will be made up of, I think I mentioned before, students, faculty, caregivers, and community members, and leadership. And we'll be really looking to dig into this data and then the systems that are perpetuating them, and then what changes make. And this team will make recommendations to both leadership and potentially to school committee, because it might ultimately require changes in policy, et cetera, or maybe recommendations that have budget implications. But this team will do the deep work and then make recommendations to both leadership and to the school committee as well. And as I mentioned, to develop proposals. The last strategic objective, we focused on the PLC structure to be the biggest lever on how to accomplish several of the objectives in the action steps under that strategic objective. As part of my sort of entry plan into the district a couple years ago, one of the things that I heard from different people that I met with was some inconsistency in the understanding and expectations around the PLC time, which is the school committee supports and has as part of the calendar. So we really sort of wanted to we ultimately determined to refresh and refocus and recapture that time, and to have alignment and expectations across the PLCs, regardless of what building they're in, and have some common goals. So ultimately, coming out of that meeting, we determined essentially one goal with 3 tiers to it, which allowed for some differentiation for the teams, for where they were in the curriculum development process. And the teams, and then we did some training over the summer with the team leaders to lead that process throughout the year. And the next steps, and that has then fed summer work. I'm going to do I want to sort of give the school committee a curriculum update, not tonight, on a different meeting, because I think we're finishing a bunch of the summer work right now, so I'm thinking a September or early October meeting would probably be best, just to give you a sense of the curriculum work that's been done really over the last year to 15 months. Because we've actually got I was sort of cataloging it today. There's actually a lot of work that has been done in a very short amount of time. So going forward around this objective, we want to develop teacher-facing documents for the curriculum materials. So you may or may not remember, a long time ago, I presented sort of my vision. And my ultimate vision is for all district staff, and I really kind of think about that person who's coming into our district as an educator for the first time, but to be able to have a document that says, here's your scope and sequence for your content area, here's the units we've developed, here's the assessments that we've developed, it's all linked, it's easy to find. So that's sort of phase one. Phase two is a public-facing version of that same document. So I've had, for example, with everything going on, I've had a lot of parents email me recently that are considering homeschool, because I'm the homeschool coordinator for the district as well, and they want to see what is the existing, third grade curriculum for blah, 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 to see if, where their child fits and make sure that when they're looking for homeschool options that they're having something that kind of aligns. And 2 years ago, if they'd asked me that question, I wouldn't have had a lot to give them. But actually, we're getting to this place where I actually got a fairly robust amount of stuff to give, and now I just need to make it so it's more easily accessible to the public. And then I mentioned before, the high school is going to be doing, as part of that data analysis, they're going to be taking a hard look at the CP program here at the high school, and really establishing common expectations for what CP is, and really raising the level. And bringing both AP and pre-AP strategies into the CP classroom. That's a big sort of step, because one of the parts of the strategic objective talks about a common approach to instruction, and that's one that we're going to be moving forward here at the high school. Some other things that have been done as well, as I mentioned, the staff read this summer. I made the decision this year to align the 4 texts to the strategic objective. I've mentioned multiple times to the committee, I think the more that we can tie our work to the strategic plan, the more likely we are more likely to move the strategic plan forward in an effective way. So we normally run a staff read in the summertime. So each of the 4 texts, there was 4 texts, one that was tightly aligned to each of the 4 strategic objectives. So one I already mentioned, culturally responsive teaching in the brain. Another was We Got This, which is a text by, oh my gosh, I just lost the author's name. But it'll come back to me later. Focus, which is for strategic objective 4 by Mike Smoker, and All Learning is Social Emotional connects to strategic objective 2. And so that we've had several staff that have taken on. Some staff took all 4 books, but we offered it. In the past, it's sort of been people either recommended, or we had some books which I'm not sure were as tightly connected to the strategic plan. So these were 4 texts. If you wanted one of these 4 texts, we provided it as the district to really kind of move these ideas, continue to move these ideas forward. As has been talked about here, as related to the access piece, under the superintendent's leadership, we did a lot of proactive work going into remote learning to ensure all of our students had access, both to hardware as well to the internet. I know, I think Jim has presented previously about his work to get wireless hotspots to families that didn't have internet access. So that was a real tightly aligned to our strategic plan. And additionally, our English language learners teachers have been doing a phenomenal job sort of cobbling materials together on their own, but working with our former business manager, Katie Isernio. Over the last 2 years, we've been able to get one consistent EL curriculum for our students K-12, which was a big sort of high leverage point, something that I know particularly I'm proud of, because one of the other hats I wear is I am the EL director for the district. And then the part of one of the strategic objectives, the first one is about expanding community involvement. Joy's done a phenomenal job expanding the mentor program, extending and expanding and formalizing the process for volunteers in the district, and developing consistency across the district. Towards strategic objective 4, we made a big shift and really did some very rapid training. I joked a little bit, I've joked a couple times at the admin meeting. We were able to do in 2 days regarding technology, stuff that we've been really trying to move forward for like years. Because of the, a superintendent said to me a long time ago, never waste a good crisis. And I think this was one of the opportunities when we had to move everybody, we did some consistent training for everybody, and the staff, really rose to the occasion. We leapt by light years around our use around technology. And then the strategic objective 3 talks about expanding our partnerships for early childhood access. So again, as the superintendent has reported in other times, just as a reminder, both through Head Start at Chatham Elementary School and the Y program at HES, we've expanded opportunities for early childhood care for young families in both the two towns. And then sort of just end with this quote, which is, like all things, our strategic plan is a work in progress. As I mentioned, we spent 4 days last year really digging into the strategic plan and figuring out what our next steps were. We spent 4 days this year in this room figuring out how we're going to reopen schools. So the next steps that I put up previously don't have a lot of teeth and depth to them, and that's quite frankly and honestly because we haven't had the time as an administrative team yet to dig into them. I think I've mentioned to the committee in the past, we had a regular schedule. We met twice a month as an administrative team. 1 meeting a month was always focused on the strategic plan. We got away from that as a team starting in March. It was really crisis mode after crisis mode after crisis mode. We just had a meeting, was it just yesterday? 2 days ago? I don't know. They're all starting to blend together. And we've recommitted to getting back to that schedule starting in September. So we will be digging back and I would have some more concrete information to give sort of around next steps. But those are some of the things that I know were going to happen regardless, but there are definitely some other some action items that we need to dig into. And there's plenty of other stuff that's been done. There's like a ton of work that's been done, but like I said, I didn't go action step by action step, but if there are things that people have specific questions about, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to start actually remotely. Sharon, I'm going to start with you. And you'll have to come off mic. Sharon, do you want to take yourself off mic? All right, then I'm going to move on and I'll come back to you, unless that's you. All right, I'll come back to Sharon. Terry.
Thanks, Tina. Mark, thanks. My question probably is already answered, but this is my first read-through on this. Someone once said to me, we need to be pardoned because it's been our first pandemic. Have you given thought, and as I listen to what you've done, and maybe it's already in place, just like all staff is asked to have like a substitute packet that's available and understandable for that sub to come in, is there a way in which, assuming a combination of the best does happen this fall, but we have some virtual distance learning going on, if we were able to garner the best practices from the volunteer or whatever distance learning staff and compile it and store it in a place that's available so that when and if this ever second occurs, we wouldn't be scrambling to say, how are we going to do this unit on CP or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that's a statement, I guess, but.
So I'll say yes, and. So for example, we have, again, the days are really blurring together. I think it was earlier this week. I have a group of teachers an elementary group, a middle school group, and a high school group. The posting was instructional innovators. And what essentially we were doing was calling for staff. We were focused on sort of bringing kids back into the building, but there's a lot of cross-pollination in effective strategy. Because now we have students, go into our classrooms and their desks are 6 feet apart. There's just a lot of sort of health and safety things which have an impact on our instruction. So instead of just sort of blindly going into this, this team of teachers are working, we met earlier this week, they're working through this week, and we're meeting again the beginning of next week. And they're going to be providing short training for their staff, essentially to prime the thinking tank around what you're talking about. So I gave them 4 overarching questions, which was, how are we going to effectively collaborate, allow for student collaboration in this environment? And that would include, especially here at the high school, where some of the kids are going to be at home, right? And some of the kids are going to be inside the building on any given day. How do we effectively provide feedback as a teacher to students? How do we put movement into the day? Because I've got a rising 6th grader, not in Monomoy, but 6th graders are 6th graders. And if anybody's had a 6th grade boy, they've got lots of energy, and the idea of them sitting in a desk for 5.5 hours scares me to death. So how do we make sure there's some opportunity to get up and move within the confines that we have? And then there's sort of an overarching 4th one that touches all of those. And Scott and I had a conversation not too long ago. We want to make sure that it's still fun to come to school, right? So how do we make sure that there's fun and engagement across all 3 of those things? So they're working this week to develop a training to give to their colleagues around, how do we effectively do this? In addition to that, over the summer we had staff, about 70 of our staff participated in this professional development opportunity by this organization called Modern Teacher, which was really targeted around virtual instruction. And because I'm sort of preparing for, let's call it the probability that we're going to end up in remote at some point in time. So these 70 staff are sort of our scouts. And then we have planned into the 10 days when we met, whatever day it was, yesterday or the day before, we have 2 solid days set aside for the rest of the faculty to go through through this training, at least the key essential pieces of it, and then use PLC time to get them through the rest of the bits of the training. So we do have a couple of things in place to ensure, and the Modern Teacher allows for a consistent practice and approach to address, I think, most specifically what it is you're talking about.
Anything else?
Thanks, Mark.
You good, Terry?
Yes,
Anything
good.
else?
Yep.
Okay. Meredith?
I just had one quick question, because maybe I wasn't listening quick enough. But for the equity task, are you asking for students and parents and community members?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I really want to, actually, specifically speaking to students, I really think it's important for us to have a strong student voice. Sometimes our committees have like 1 or 2 students on them, and they kind of get drawn out by the adults, but I'm actually really looking deliberately to include, especially if you just, we're all paying attention to activism, right? And a lot of students across the country have really taken active roles in activism, and I think there's a really great opportunity for our students in our district to tell us about their experiences and how we can, be better and do better for them.
Great, thank you.
And just follow up on that question. So with the caregivers and the teachers, how are you, and the students made sense, how are you going to pick the teachers, caregivers? Is there any process?
My ultimate goal is to have as many people on as possible. It's a ton of work. So the structure that I'm envisioning is but I also know that not everybody can commit to like a regular all year long type of work, and maybe even beyond that, right? So we're really looking for initially to get people together, because initially we want voice. Similarly in the way that we did with the strategic plan, we want to get as much voice into the conversation as possible. And then from that group, I want to then have a steering committee, a group that's really going to commit to moving the work forward over the course of the year. And then there'll be subcommittee work, which will be shorter projects that'll come out of some of those initial conversations that people can participate in for shorter periods of time. And then we can continue to regroup. I sort of have I'm looking for the voice, and I'm also looking to set up like communication structures out. like, because I think we're missing groups of people, right? So I'm hoping that if we can capture the right people into the room, and learn about how to better effectively communicate out, and maybe use some of the, you don't have to meet with us all year, but would you be willing to liaise into this community, to help us better engage with this particular community or that particular community?
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Sharon, you had a question, and it looks like you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yes. So I have a question about what we're talking about now, and then another question. The question about the equity committee, I'm really pretty excited about this, and I'm hoping that we can look at the equity committee in students and members of the community and all sorts as representing different voices. So we won't be seeing like all white kids.
Yeah, that's my goal,
Or-
for sure.
Okay. And that kind of falls under what Joe's suggestions were last time on our anti-racism. So we might be able to dovetail some of that. Yeah, that's very exciting. How will the members of the community hear about this to get on it?
So I worked with Steve Cass a few weeks ago. We developed, I'm trying to make it as accessible as possible as well, trying to remove as many barriers. So we have both a written communication to go out. We have a video communication to go out, which we'll do through our normal means plus push out on social media. And then I have a very simple survey, which is translated into all the languages that we currently have spoken at home or read at home, that will go out and accompany it. It's a simple, like 3-question survey that, again, is translated into every one of the known languages in the district.
Great, thank you. Sharon, is that, I guess you're done? Any more questions?
I think she said, mate, did she have one?
I think, yeah, I'm not sure. Joe, did you have a question?
Yes, no, I
Oh.
wasn't quite done yet.
Oh, I'm
Can you
sorry.
hear me, Tina?
Yes, go ahead.
So the other question was on the overall presentation of the strategic plan. I think I missed something. I remember when Joe and I and I think it was Charles were on that smaller group for the strategic plan, and the part I remember the most was talking about personal finance and putting in some specific things on civics and government in there. There were other life skill kind of things, and so I missed where that was. What happened to that? I know that 2019 was the social studies year, but I didn't hear any of the results of that.
Yeah, so I think I didn't get into every nitty-gritty of the plan, but I can speak to it now. So to that specific action item, it did speak to adopting a curriculum review cycle that looked to add, to your point, it was civics, digital literacy, I do think personal finance was on the list, and like several health-related topics.
Yes, yes.
So with the groups slated to go through curriculum review over the last year and a half were the history department, not the wellness department, the history department, the world language department, and the social studies / history department. So I guess in reverse order, the social studies history department, actually K to 12, has gone through and they've used that PLC structure that I mentioned before to do a complete revision of their curriculum because we had just recently received new standards from the state. So on a macro level, the standards from the state embed civics all the way up. It's a key sort of driver and priority area for the entire standard, so they're embedded all the way through. Specifically, the action plan, or one of the action steps was us, for example, to investigate whether or not the citizenship test would be sort of a way we could assess whether or not students had met certain civics competencies by the time they got to the 10th or 11th grade. We did investigate that. we ultimately determined that that wasn't the best tool to use, mostly because the law has come out that you need to have two civics projects, one in the middle, the way the word's language, or the way the law's written, essentially means we have two in our particular high school because we have 8th grade in our high school. One has to be in 8th grade and one has to be in the high school. So originally we thought we were kind of off the hook because our 8th grade is in the high school, but upon further clarification, we had to have two. So, and the requirements for that civics project are very robust, and they go far beyond what we would have gotten just from the U.S. Citizenship test. So we actually this summer, part of the curriculum work that's being done this summer is one of our department members of the high school department. So the 8th grade is already taken care of because of Project Citizen, which is a very robust civics project. Several of those of you that have been at town meetings, the students have presented, right? So it's very action-oriented, civics-oriented. So then this summer, time and funds were allocated towards one of the members of the history department, taking what was a fledgling, or not fledgling, there's something that's utilized in our U.S. History 2 course already, but doesn't meet all the criteria. So really looking on how we can expand that to make sure it meets all the criteria for the civics project. So that's a piece where we've been specifically looking at civics. And then, let's see, ELA, you know, I presented about the work that we did around the adopting the or making the recommendation to adopt the ELA curriculum. Part of that consideration was making sure, which met with that strategic objective, that they were hands-on, engaging, real-life opportunities, and it also included embedded within that history and social studies concepts, which tied back directly to the civics piece. When we looked at the middle school as a school is already where we have our strongest sort of service learning component, which is built in. We really felt like the ELA curriculum at the middle school was already in a strong position and really didn't need any additions. And then the 8th grade ELA curriculum is tied directly, they work hand in hand with the social studies department through Project Citizen. So then it was really looking at 9-12. And we ultimately decided to focus 9-12 on diversifying our canon. So we had to place that priority ahead of some of the other ones, because as we did an analysis of our text that we're using 9-12, almost all white authors, almost all male authors, almost all male white protagonists, you know, there was a large voices missing from our text. So we really focused our energy there. And then world language, we didn't get to world language, I'll be perfectly honest. And we have wellness coming up. Some work has been done in wellness, which will address some of the specific pieces in the strategic plan. And I think math is also this year. But we've also kind of changed the structure a little bit since then. Because everybody was working in PLCs, they've all been working on the curriculum at the same time versus just focusing on one content area at a time, or a couple content areas at a time.
Okay, thank you.
Mark?
Yeah.
I want to follow up with that. So Mark, I was very excited to hear your comments about that you reviewed that work and found out that there was a lot of missing voices. The thing I would love to have is all of this, I'm sure you wrote up all this stuff about, especially, I'm interested in the social studies. So is there like several pages of narrative about that?
No.
That I can.
If I'm being 100% honest, I haven't got to it yet. However, I'd be happy to provide the school committee with a report once I get out from under the water that I'm currently in, but I would be happy to give a more detailed action step by action step report, yes. Okay. That I can submit to the committee.
For me, it's the civics government part of the social studies, and then on the financial literacy, I'm more concerned than ever because we had promotion, I guess, I don't know if it's really a promotion, our wonderful history teacher, Mr. Alexander, who did teach that course. I'm not sure we'll be teaching it now since he's assistant principal. So I'm just wondering and hoping, because a lot of people, a lot of students I've run into said that that was their most useful and glowing remarks about that course.
Yeah, and we had had some conversation at the high school level last year around running a seminar during JOSM that we would ultimately assign to all students. And we never got to finalizing what it would look like, but it was around how do we address ensuring financial literacy for all of our students. And, you know, I did have some initial conversations with Dave last year, like when they do the Credit for Life Fair. It's a great activity, and it's a little too late, especially if students are making decisions. Like, it's okay if you're like thinking about how I'm gonna, well, it's fine because they're not on their own yet, right? But it's also, if students are thinking about career paths, it's a little late for that. Like, I'd like to have them thinking about sort of the connection between the decisions they're making in high school, the career paths that opens for them, and then sort of the connection to the finance piece, right? So, you know, my thing that I used to always say as a principal was, you know, education should be about keeping doors open for you. You can go and do whatever you want. I mean, my brother's been a very successful landscaper his entire life and never went to college, but he made the choice to do that. And I think that's different than finding yourself in a job that's the only option that you've left available to yourself. And I think we want to be continuing to open doors for kids. And I think part of that is taking an experience like that and bringing it down in some shape and form into a lower level.
Great, thank you. Nancy?
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. So my first one is, I remember Mark Wilson coming when he did the survey with the middle school, I think is what started the relationship survey.
Yep.
And one of the things that he ended up doing after getting the results was drilling down the data specifically to one student, one teacher, and making sure, and I'm curious, I'm assuming you're doing something similar still? Or?
That was done at each of the school levels,
Okay.
yeah. That practice was continued. I didn't want to share teacher
Oh,
level
no.
information, but yeah, that practice was, the
Okay.
practice that, it was a strong practice that existed in one portion of our district that we look to expand across the district with
Okay.
all parts.
I just wanted to make sure because that part I think is one of the most powerful
Yeah.
pieces, and
Yeah, we actually stole Mr. Wilson's like memo that he gives to the faculty and pushed it out to all the schools, so.
excellent.
Yep.
That's good. It's good to steal stuff like that. And then could you give a little bit more of an example? You were talking about under objective 3, the barriers from the towns, on the town side. You gave rec as an example. I was wondering if other types of things that would be considered barriers.
Yeah, so.
I'm struggling to think of anything.
Yeah, essentially the conversation was around, so and rec is, you know, both sports plus other opportunities they allow for kids, right? But often it's a fee-based activity. So, a conversation we were having in those meetings was that relationships, so if you use a sports team just as an example, but it can expand to all different areas, right? So if you use a sports team as an example, if by the time students get to the 6th or 7th grade is their first time to really be able to participate in organized sports, and you've got another group of kids who've been doing it since they were, 5, and have been doing it kind of together since they were 5, because we are a small community, right? Then we're concerned that there's a potential there for sort of already creating segregated groups that start before they ever show up inside of our doors. And we're trying to look a little bit further upstream on how we might be able to support families who are maybe having access issues to sports, to intramurals, to even to music opportunities, art opportunities that are offered through our towns. And was there a way for us to partner with the towns to ensure access to programs like that start to form groups of students that are either have, we want to make sure one population isn't sort of getting a leg up, for lack of a better phrase.
Right. Okay, thank you. And then you mentioned about the PLCs and how powerful they are in getting that information out there. And I think that that's still a perception that why do we even have that time? So I just would encourage you to try to still keep that information out there to parents so that they understand that this is an important time for the teachers to have. It's not just sending the kids home early so that the teachers can grade papers. You know,
Right.
they're doing solid work.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a suggestion. And then my last was regarding Jen Police and her wanting to, I just want to commend her for wanting to dig deeper into the different course levels throughout the high school, because I think that's very powerful as well. Because I think there's a perception that, oh, I can't take honors, I wasn't in this class as a freshman, or, you know, they get locked into a track.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, encourage the kids to take it, you know, let them get a C if they need to, or whatever it is, but encourage them to take the higher level courses. So I really want to commend her for doing that. So, and also thank you for the presentation.
Great.
You're a
And-
good guinea pig.
And Joe, did you have anything at all? Nothing? Anybody else? Before we close with this, never waste a good crisis. I like that quote and I wrote it down. So that was a good quote.
It's been sort of the motto of the last like 4.5 months or 5 months.
5.
Great quote.
Going on 5.
Thank you,
Case you're
Mark,
counting.
and Melissa, thank you.
Tina, I'm sorry,
yes.
could I pose
Sure,
one
go ahead.
question? It just reinforces something Nancy just said that triggered in my mind, that the idea of gathering up kids to have them accept a challenge, especially in the group of diverse kids. Obviously, we understand that that really begins at the 2 elementary schools, not just middle, most especially not high school, because many of these youngsters, their psychological imprint begins when they're 3 years old and 4 years old at daycare, before they even arrive at our step to say, I'm at a level I really want to stay. So at some point, that obviously all the staff knows that. If you make certain that's reinforced with everyone in those lower elementary grades where they begin to ID kids that could really be given a boost to challenge them. So
All right.
Thank
Great,
you.
Thank you.
that was a statement, wasn't it? There was no question.
And I like that.
You said to raise your
Nice way to
voice
close.
again.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to the next item, the high school recognition and acknowledgement agreement for solar project.
So hopefully this can be short and sweet, but we, as the committee knows, we have intended to put a solar array on top of this building using a developer that we would be providing the area, the roof, for the solar panels. We would be then purchasing the electricity off of those panels that would save the district money, because we'd be, providing the surface for the panels. The interesting twist is, and this is how we'll call it revisionist history. When I first came to the district, I think day one, I was sitting down with Katie Isarneo, and she was explaining to me, that Chatham owns the middle school and the Chatham Elementary School, and Harwich owns Harwich Elementary School in the district, that this is the district's building. And even when you read the lease, this is sort of the district's building until you try to put a solar array on top of the building that has a 20-year agreement that you're entering into. And our lease is a 20-year lease with the town, but but it has already begun, so it would, that initial lease would end before this 20-year lease for the solar array would end. So clearly the developers want to establish who owns the building, so lawyers got involved. And so what we have here is a document that the Harwich Selectmen and our school committee and the developer would need to sign off on. So the short and sweet is on the first page, very bottom. I'll try to do this without my glasses because I can't have my mask on and my glasses at the same time. But basically it's saying that Harwich is the sole title owner of this property, which They are, so the property's Harwich's property, the building's built on Harwich's property, so the second page, gets at that Harwich, the town of Harwich is acknowledging that the school district's the leasee of that property, and not that the district is the owner of it. So it's just sort of clarifying how it truly exists, given, who owns the land. Harwich acknowledges that the school district has the right to sublease our roof for a rooftop array with a developer. Harwich consents to that lease. And then on the second to last page, number 6, there's the leasee possession. And that section really just gets into if for whatever reason, and it's one of those, you can't imagine it happening, but if for whatever reason our lease expires and Harwich wants to do something else with this building, that the developer still has the right to have that array up there, that, that everybody's acknowledging that this lease continues on for the rooftop array. That's sort of it in a nutshell. I just ask that the committee will support this, so, and then would be discussed by the selectmen as well, and is assuming that all parties sign off, we can proceed forward with getting the rooftop array. The building, just for those that don't know, the building was built solar ready. So the conduit was up there for an array. We just wanted to make sure that all of the roof was sealed, not leaking, and everything before we went and put any sort of array on. We wanted to make sure that anything that would be sort of warranty work that the contractor needed to do was done. The roof has been in great shape, and we're really poised to put the array up there and reap the benefits of that and save the taxpayers money too in the process.
Wonderful, thank you. Any questions, anybody? Joe or Sharon, questions? So would someone like to make a motion that we accept this?
Madam Chair,
Nancy, thank you.
I move to approve the recognition and acknowledgement agreement for the solar project as presented.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
And Meredith seconded, so we're going to do a roll call vote, and we'll start remotely. Sharon?
Aye.
Okay, Joe?
Aye.
Meredith?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so that's unanimous. Wonderful. Now we're going to move on to our school committee workshop retreat, and we had decided to talk a little bit about this tonight. Do we want to pick a date? I don't know if everybody has this from the last meeting, just our schedule. Do we want to pick a date and commit to it, taking one of our school committee meetings, or do we want to put a whole other date altogether on the calendar for the purpose of a workshop? And if so, and then we can talk a little bit, if anybody has ideas about topics that they think are important for us to consider during that time. We'll be working on our plans, but is there a topic that we also should be putting into the workshop? So I'll entertain any conversation. Terry?
I would suggest we entertain identifying a standalone date for us, surrounded with some sandwiches and cold drinks, that we would spend as a group in a retreat mode. And second suggestion would be to concretize 1 or 2 or 3 goals for the coming year, review the past year's goals that represented 5, and maybe refocus the anti-racism document that we all voted on a couple of weeks ago, and see how that connects in some way, that we would be able to create a goal from that within the district. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Sharon or Joe? So Terry's proposing, oh, go ahead, Sharon.
I agree with everything Terry said.
Okay, good. Any other comments? So Terry's proposing a stand-alone date, so not against our scheduled meetings. So do we want to pick a date now? Because I know we're opening, or right now we're supposed to open the 14th, so we want to kind of see how all that goes. Do you want to look at October? Does anybody have an idea on a date you want to propose?
I would suggest that we don't go anywhere near later than the Columbus Day weekend.
Okay.
So at some point from that date backwards into the middle of the 20s of September, I'd suggest on an odd Thursday that we would normally not be meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I think, would that put us on October 1? Would that be right?
Yes.
So if we have September 24th, that would be a Thursday meeting. So then, I think it's October 1, is that right? That next Thursday? How does that sound for everybody?
Good.
Joe, so is that good, everybody? All right. So let's
Yes.
go for October 1st. And do we want to just keep it at 6:30? Do we want to meet at 6? Anybody have an idea?
I like 6.
6 o'clock? Joe,
Sounds
Sharon,
good.
Meredith, is that okay?
6 sounds good.
All right, so October 1st at 6, and we'll work on our goals. And how does everybody feel about exploring a bit more of the anti-racism, the statement that Joe put together, really taking a hard look at that? And is that good? So that'll be our topic? All right. Sharon?
I
go
think,
ahead.
I think both of those resolutions we should take a look at, and any other ideas we might have.
Okay. All right, great. All right, then that's our topic and our date. Anything else anybody wants to say about that? I don't really think we need to take a vote because it's consensus, so, yes, Joe?
So I'm assuming we'll be holding this at the library, unless we have a better
Actually,
location. or-
thank you very much. That's a good question. Do we want to do it remotely? So all of us can be in the room, or, because it looks like we're gonna have to split again if we do, I'm open. Terry offered drinks and snacks, but,
Terry's here if there's egg salad, right?
The
Yeah.
egg salad is excellent, I've always said. Like, I miss that, and I'm I sleep in, so I can't swing in here to get a luncheon, but that might be a thought. But I would go along with Joseph, that this space, I think, is, in the light of what we're living through, is better than the conference room. So I would suggest this is a good spot.
okay, so you're saying we do this, but then Sharon, I know that you will have to be remote, correct?
Yes, I honestly am finding this with us remote and you all there much harder than when we were all on remote. So I'm suggesting that we all do this on remote, but, I'm just one member.
Joe, do you have a thought about it?
It's so much easier and more effective to be live, so I prefer that. On the other hand, I have just a family concern where safety is really important. And then my own personal bias is to bend as much as possible to any of the serious needs of any colleague, so that even at the risk of some effectiveness, that every school committee member feels involved and safe at the same time. How we do that, of course, is I guess still to be determined, and we're in the process of learning as we're going through these meetings starting today.
Okay. Thank you. Terry?
Assuming that date holds and that nothing untoward happens in the interim, I think this dynamic with our fellow members calling their own shots as far as remote, much like identical what we're having here, because I think whatever I do think that there's a so-called, without, even with the masks and 6 feet, there's something to be said when you're trying to develop some statements of in-person chatting. So I would favor any of us who can come as a group, and we do, and everyone calls their own shots as far as, for these reasons, I can't make it, which is true and good too, so.
Okay, so let me ask this, because this would be a meeting that we wouldn't air, right? It would just, so we don't need the television, but we would need assistance for this.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was just thinking that if it's just us, because it's not aired, we don't need to have the screen, we could have a computer, so
Oh, yeah.
basically a table with a virtual Sharon and a virtual Joe sitting at the table, kind of more facing us than having them up on the screen.
Okay,
That's what I envisioned, but
okay. And Leah, do you typically join? I can't recall from last year, so it's just us? Doesn't mean I couldn't come and help set up. Okay. So, okay, thank you. So I'm hearing a couple to possibly do it all remote, and then I'm hearing a couple to do what we're doing tonight. Meredith, do you have a thought?
I think a hybrid model would be
All right,
appropriate, you know,
okay.
so
So
that
we'll-
those that can come, and those that,
All right, so we can reserve the space, which we'll do, and all right, so Sharon and Joe, it sounds like the majority, at least in the room right now, is to do a hybrid, and we would pull you in some, we'll figure it out. You won't be up on a big screen, but you can't really see it right now anyway.
we got
So-
giant Joe on the screen. Okay.
Yes. So we will do a hybrid. Yes, Joe, go ahead.
What would be the best method, in your opinion, for school committee members between now and a particular date to raise with you possible agenda items for the workshop retreat?
Well, you can throw some out right now, or you could always, let's see, it's October 1st, so you could always send me an email unless you have something you want to put out right now.
No.
Okay. All right. So we'll do a hybrid. So October 1st, 6 o'clock, and we'll get the room reserved and figure all the details. Sound good? All right. So moving on to the next item. Update on reopening in-person and distance learning. Dr. Carpenter.
So just a quick update here. Since last we spoke, I've hosted a couple parent meetings that were well attended, and the first one went sort of over capacity of Google Meet, so we had a second one. And we also, each of the principals have held building level meetings with their families, or one or more building level meetings. We've held a staff meeting to answer questions, just trying to make sure that everybody understands what the reopening plan is and what the options are. On last Wednesday, families were to let us know which option they wanted to have, and I think we did a fairly good job of communicating, because I think we had virtually all the families responded. So we had in the global scheme of things, with with almost 1,900 students, we didn't have many families that we needed to track down for a response, because this was one of those, we needed to know which option you wanted, and did you need transportation. So we placed the calls to the families that didn't respond. The way it broke out is that we have roughly 75% of the families have opted for in-person learning. About 25% of the families have opted for distance learning. So subsequently, we had sort of placeholders out there that we had sort of notified staff that there would be distance learning options at the elementary, middle, and high school level, and we needed to shift and have more of those distance learning options. So we put that out to staff. Staff notified us, and we have been placing them in distance learning options if that's the case, and in-person the in-person learning option. So again, roughly splitting out about a quarter of the staff one direction, 3/4 the other direction. Some of the challenges that we have going into this is, you can imagine, we're a school district that's essentially running two parallel school systems. So there are some things that just aren't going to happen like they had in past years. At the elementary level, we had, and also the middle school level, we had some interventionists that we could break students out for small group supports, because we want to make sure that we've got both of these options covered. We've had to assign interventionists either a distance learning classroom or an in-person learning classroom, and so it's sort of all hands on deck to successfully put out these two options. I am cautiously optimistic that we can still support the necessary intervention by maintaining some extremely low class sizes. When we really look at the numbers in terms of what the in-person class sizes look like, I think we'll have almost every class will be fewer than 15 students, with many of the in-person classrooms down around a dozen kids. So I think that ability to go and provide more of an individualized supports, even though we're distanced and wearing masks, it can happen. And we've been able to keep most of the distance learning sections also fairly low as well. So again, it's been a challenge to go and try to do two parallel things, and lots of logistics to go work out quickly. But I think we're well poised for reopening in two different modes, and we appear to have bus transportation also under control. Remember, that was a big challenge that we have is getting the buses so that we're down to no more than 23 children on a bus, which has the superintendent for the first time encouraging families to drive to school. So bus drop-offs at some of our buildings will be a little different than they had been in the past, so that we can have more real estate for parents to drop off and not end up choking the roadways in the communities around the schools. But we've been working with public safety on that, and in some cases DPW, to support the logistics of drop-off under these unique circumstances. So I think we're well positioned. I know now that with the students placed, the middle school and high school are rapidly putting together schedules. That was one of those things that, a scheduling process that usually happens in the late spring is now compressed into a couple weeks before the students get here. So it's been a little crazy, but we've got it under control.
Thank you. Thanks for all the hard work. Terry?
A question, it's just how my mind works on the parallel assignments, but for instance, if all goes well, and we have some high school electives, and as we find their numbers, a couple of sections, or 4 sections, or 2, or whatever it might be, end up being 9 kids, 10 kids for a particular teacher. What would prevent all 9 to come in 5 days a week?
Well, I don't think it would be a challenge to have all 9 come in 5 days a week. As it is, they come in 2 out of every 3 days.
I should say 6-day rotation.
1 week, 1 week they'd be there 3 days, and the other week 4, or if I have it right. But what we are doing, and this is something that I have asked each of the principals to go back to do, is look at the families that have elected for distance learning, and look to see, do we have children that are going to be in that mode that we've already known from the spring that aren't going to be successful in that mode, and reach out and talk to the parents about what it's really going to look like in classrooms. That at the high school, I would imagine many of the high school classrooms are going to have about 10 or 11 students in them tops. And, so at the high school, we're well positioned to have the administration reach out to families whose children were not successful and say, we would like your child to come every day, not 2 out of 3 days, to make sure that we're providing the supports for this, for the kids that need the supports the most. And that was part of the plan as we went into this, is to do what we can, again, getting back to the strategic plan. We want to close achievement gaps, not widen them because of this, this current COVID challenge.
My thought was, in parallel, we're on the same page, that if we are going to have 25%, give or take, virtual remote, and then a 75% of the kids, and if we are optimistic and things go well daily, well, if we're in for a penny, we might not be in for a pound. So if there were sections that, not for kids with 18 in the class, but for that number of 9, 8, 10, that would be a big plus to slide that group in, of needier kids, so that we're heading in the right direction. Because if we have to do something in the form of the now familiar word pivot, you might as well do it with more kids sitting here that might have to go back home, but, good.
Thank you. Sharon, go ahead.
Yes, I have to say that I have no idea how much work has gone into this. But I can imagine it must be feeling like 24 hours for a lot of people working on this reopening plan. I'm thrilled to hear that we, unlike many schools, are going to be doing 6 feet from student to student and maybe even further now with this new information that Dr. Carpenter is providing. I think that so many things have gone on well. The parent forums that Scott's done, and that I think I only heard one of the principal ones, but they were very good, and talk about well attended. It took me 38 minutes to get into the first one Scott was doing, because it went, I don't have any idea, but well over 250 people. And then, I've been really, really thrilled that Scott's been saying that all the kids are going to be wearing masks, all the teachers will be wearing masks. I do have I shouldn't say a lot of sleepless nights, but it is on my mind a lot about the devil is in the details of this. The other thing that went home that Dr. Carpenter said that clarified even more about the efficiencies or not efficiencies of, for instance, gaiters and I forget what the other one was, but anyway, and bandanas not being effective, and those vents, I have no idea when I saw those vents on masks that those were letting out all the respiration from the person wearing them. So, these are very, very wonderful things. I still am having an issue with the mask breaks. And so I've researched this a little bit, and I think Orleans Elementary, and several South Shore schools I've found that are having all of this outside. And I was listening to what Mark Smith was saying about the kids needing motion breaks, being stuck in those chairs all the time. I'm hoping that we can find a way. I know in Norwell they're setting a certain time for the kids to have those mask breaks. I don't know if it's by grade or by classroom or what, but they're being sent out so they can have the mask break outside and also do some activity a couple of different times of the day. The research has been talking about that if a kid, or I guess a teacher in a classroom, was unmasked, that it could go from 13 to even 16 feet away instead of the 6. And of course it does get less, I don't know if you call it dense, but but it does go that far, and it can last up to 3 hours, so it doesn't, I'm not any math genius, but it doesn't seem as though if the kids are in the classroom with their mask off, that they're going to be safe. So that's my one kicker, but overall, I think that, we're way ahead of other schools on so many things.
Thank you, Sharon. Joe?
Memo to Dr. Carpenter for future consideration based on data gathering. We're hearing on national news, local newspapers, a steady drumbeat of school opening disasters on the collegiate level, at high schools, and so on. Does that constant refrain of school problems have an influence on the ratio of in-school learning, at-home learning here in our district between now and mid-September when school reopens? So I have a feeling you're going to be watching that carefully anyway, but I think it would be important information. I think it would be very useful information for us to have now. I think you mentioned there's a kind of 75-25% split. I'd be curious to see what that number looks like in just a few short, rapidly approaching weeks. Thank you.
So to just clarify one thing on that, Joe, what we communicated to parents as we were going through this is that there's going to be very limited opportunities after they make their choice to shift modes, because we're dedicating staffing one direction or the other direction. So if we dedicate X number of teachers for distance learning and this many teachers for in-person learning, those teachers are going to, in the next day or so, are going to have fully fleshed out class lists and groups of kids, and after that we don't have the ability to shift that teacher another direction. We indicated in what we put out to families that we could accommodate a mid-year shift, and we could do a mid-year recalculation on who would want distance versus in-person. And I also think that thanks to to school districts or one particular school district in Georgia that that had lots of kids walking down a hallway without masks, I think it becomes a unfortunate reminder for our principals. And I was tongue in cheek telling our principals look at that picture. That's what you don't want to have happen in your building. And I think our local area I think is in a very different mindset when it comes to masks in general. So I think we can take lessons learned elsewhere and avoid repeating history. And I do think I've shared this very publicly. I think we are relative to many school districts in the country and state very well positioned to have in-person learning happen and have it happen very safely. And just things that make Monomoy different than most, just from the get-go. We, ever since I've come here, we have staffed our buildings for classrooms that have 18 plus or minus 1 at the elementary school, 19 plus or minus 2 at the high school. So, so when you take a classroom that is staffed like that and pull a quarter of the kids out because they're distance learning, suddenly we're now looking at in-person learning that's a dozen to 14 tops in a typical classroom. And at the high school, keep in mind that a third of those kids now, a third of that 14 are going to be distance learning on any given day. So the the class sizes are going to be very manageable. We also have extremely small enrollments in any given building. So the number of kids that are mixing at any given time in any given school relative to elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools elsewhere is also, a lot less. So I've had parents ask me multiple times, well, why aren't we doing what Barnstable's doing, where half of the school goes Monday and Tuesday, and half of the school goes Thursday and Friday, and they distance learn on Wednesdays and the days that they're not in school. Well, it's like if, half of Barnstable High School is a lot more kids mixing than all of Monomoy Regional High School. And, so it's, so we're positioned just by size to have those protective factors. A third protective factor that, that we've heard a lot about is just HVAC systems. And I've repeated this again and again. As of yesterday, I believe, when they finished the final maintenance on exhaust fans on some of the roofs at the elementary schools and middle school, every single HVAC component in this district works. Every rooftop unit, every univent, every air handler, every exhaust fan. So we have the ability to move the maximum amount of fresh air into classrooms. Every window that should be able to open can open. It's like school districts generally aren't able to say that about their facilities, but Rick Travers and his crew have done an amazing job of keeping up with the maintenance on our buildings, so we're well positioned there. And the last and an extremely important piece here is, despite the spikes that we're seeing of COVID in different areas nationally, and I'm on with our health departments constantly. As of yesterday, I believe we have 0 active cases in Chatham. I believe there's only 3 active cases in Harwich, all being monitored. And and that's, so relatively speaking, it's, we're in a very good health place just with where the virus is in our districts. And I'm somebody who's has said it multiple times. I'm conservative when it comes to this, and people are like, well, what metric are you going to follow? And I'm like, it's like I'm following the metric of one. If we have one person, we can just quickly pivot and quarantine and just say this class is going to be quarantined, and communicate out to families to say, because of the social distancing that we're going to be maintaining in classrooms, and because we're wearing masks, all those kids, although we'll be quarantining out of abundance of safety, the kids and teachers actually shouldn't even meet the CDC definition of close contacts because of the 6-foot plus spacing that we'll have. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we can be successful where some schools and some districts might not be as successful, but we've got a lot of things going for us, and I fully understand that the landscape of the virus could change, and if it does, we'll react to it, but we're very well positioned now to open safely.
Thank you. Any other questions, Meredith?
I just have one question, and it could still be in the details in the planning, but when you said that some of the interventionists may be taking a cohort of students distance, or are those the special educators? I just wonder that we're meeting those needs still.
No, it's not our special educators, but but if you'd get a little extra reading support or a little, they're more of our Title I.
Okay.
Our Title I interventionists. It does have a financial piece because because we're using them as classroom teachers and not interventionists, we won't be able to use the grant money that way. So we'll have to cover a small amount of money for for what the grant was covering out of their salaries. But again, it's trying to make sure that we're we're keeping the class sizes down, both, in terms of remote learning and in-person learning.
That's great. I love the small class sizes. I just was wondering about that.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to share, because I attended this morning, State Senator Julian Sear hosted, along with the Cape Cod, it was a Cape Cod Reopening Task Force. Very, very good presentation. And one of the things I was very proud of, because I was just listening to the questions and looking at the chat and seeing all these questions and chaos going on, and I felt like, oh, wow, we're so far. I mean, I was just really proud. I know Sharon popped in for a little bit, but I was there for the whole time, and I just felt really confident in what we're doing, based on all this, everything else everybody else seems to be doing. So just thought I would share that. All right, so moving on to subcommittee reports. We have in your packet a first reading of the face coverings. And I'm sure you've had a chance at least to review it. Any comments or questions? And we'll be voting on this at the September 10th meeting. This is just a first read. Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. Towards the end, where we talk about violations of this policy by staff,
Yes.
I would say my first thought was, oh, that certainly can be deleted. How could that possibly be necessary? Further consideration led me to think it should be not only retained, but maybe amplified for clarity. Just as, if there's any thought, is there any thought to adding a sentence to be more simply clear and explicit about the reference to other violations of school committee policy? In other words, another sentence beginning with "that is," comma, and explaining what the way that problem would be handled. And I would think, frankly, that it's given the nature of the problem regarding face coverings, the seriousness of this is just should be so obvious. And then a little tiny grammar point in the paragraph above. Students, the students is plural, and there are several plural references following from that, except for the second line towards the end where it says student. So that should just probably all be plural. I mention it now only because I'll probably forget to send an email tomorrow, so my apologies. But maybe a little more, just some thought to maybe a little more spelling out of how violations of policy by staff would be handled. Thinking a sentence or two if
Okay. All right, thank you.
I would vote for this regardless. Just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. Sharon?
Yes, I would not vote for this way at all because of my comments earlier. I know that Scott originally said every time that all people would be wearing face masks. I would not, I certainly want people to get their needs met. However, I don't want it at the expense of costing someone else their life, potentially. And so I think anything like this has to take in that consideration. I'm not sure, because it says something about some kind of plastic barriers or something like that. Am I to take this to mean something in a separate classroom with other kids that would need also no masks? Or are we talking about in the average classroom with other kids that their parents would be expecting, and I would be expecting that they would be safe with no one else breathing?
Sharon, can you
potentially COVID.
can you clarify what paragraph specifically are you speaking about?
Exceptions. It's the third
Oh,
paragraph.
third one, okay. And so your issue is, you are not open to any exceptions, is that what I'm hearing?
unless we can ensure the safety, that would mean to me that there was a physical barrier from ceiling to floor that, or for 13 feet, they're talking about 13 to 16 feet. If there was some kind of plexiglass around where that, if somebody cough sneezed, that would extend out like 13 to 15, 16 feet. But I'm really adamant about that we have to ensure the safety of children and teachers. So I don't see any exceptions to people's safety. When we have other issues of safety in the school, we don't jeopardize other people's safety. So, you know, I don't know the answer to some of the exceptions. I just know that it's the same issue.
Okay. And just for what it's worth, this came up this morning with Senator Sear, and it was interesting, because nobody else in other school districts, they were okay with the exceptions, but that's just a side note.
Well, I can tell you, I was in a special ed meeting with a different district off Cape this morning with the special ed director and any parents or anyone that wanted to be in it. And they said there'd be no exceptions to all those parents.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else, questions, comments? And Sharon, was that it for you?
That was it. Thank
All right.
you so much.
So, this is supposed to come back for a read, but I think it probably needs to go back into policy for a couple of things that were set. So I guess policy, we are meeting on Monday, so I guess we'll add this to our agenda, policy. So we'll take a look at a couple of things, but I still intend to have it back. Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
You have to have 2 readings before they can be voted. So if this is not the first reading and there's changes made after tonight, they would have to wait until
Okay.
the second meeting in September to be passed, and I don't know how that would work if we have
That's
no
true.
full committee policy stating that masks are required.
Okay, so I think what Joe offered was very minor, so I don't think that was an issue, because Joe just had grammatical. I think he was just asking for some examples. What Sharon is asking is about the exceptions. So does anybody, how does everybody else feel about this? Any comments about it? Terry?
We normally have a week or 2 weeks to review it rather than this evening. It's good that we've started to pick that up, and Sharon's thought it has some validity, but there are 7 votes, so between now and then, there may be a suggestion as to how to revise that exception paragraph, or there may be a discussion that moves forward. So I don't see any rush tonight to be able to come up with an answer for it. I think Sharon said she doesn't have one right now.
Right.
Nor do I.
Right, and I'm not looking for a vote. I'm just trying to figure out what our next step might be. It'll have to go back to policy, I think. But go ahead, Nancy, you were going to say something?
I was just gonna say, what happens if school starts on September
That's right.
14th without a policy?
Yep, that's right.
The logistics of that.
So, yeah, because I think the intention for policy was to have this tonight for a first read and to have it approved, hopefully, at the September 10th meeting so that it's in place for the 14th.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So we're in a
I
bit of
have a thought. So if we could put in there, in that 3rd paragraph, under circumstances, with the provision that other masked students would be a minimum of 15 feet away from an unmasked person, then I would vote for it.
So you're saying, okay. So, I don't know, go ahead, Nancy.
And I hate to put Melissa on the spot, but I'm just wondering if you have, an idea of how many students are we talking about that this exception would apply to? Because I know that even just going out in public, while masks are required for you to go into most stores, there are exceptions for people who have disabilities and can't or have challenges that they won't wear them.
So So the first, the first group of folks that we'd be looking at are mostly taking remote as the option because they themselves are compromised, their child is compromised, whatever the case is. We do have some students, certainly who receive behavioral support that, we are working with families now with a behavioral consultant to do some programming and preparation where they might have some difficulty. Our staff are prepared, or will be prepared, I should say, with additional PPE to continue working with those children, to don their masks. So honestly, it's a very small group of students. The students most vulnerable or who had the most challenges, we practiced over our remote summer session on wearing masks. Some of our most challenging, folks have impressed me beyond belief in their ability to wear a mask. So we're talking about a small group of people, but, part of the issue is you can't also then discriminate nor violate other federal and state laws regarding accommodation for children to access their education. So it's a very fine line, and I would be remiss to say that would concern me to say you can't have an exception because now you may potentially violate a right that we actually don't have a right to do. But we would put everything in place to ensure safety and we would never just allow, a child without a mask to be, running around and around other kids. We would have procedures in place.
Thank you, Ms. Go ahead.
I'll violate my own suggestion to have all of us review this for a week or whatever, however, seeing that we're here. In my life, and I think it's all of us, we all have exceptions in our lives. So if there's a third paragraph down that states some exceptions, we have a full-time principal, we have a full-time nurse, we have a full-time doctor. If something so minimal comes up, I think there are kids in all of our families. This marvelous technology here, that's an exception. So I would, at this stage, allow it to stay and allow those in charge for that 1 or 2 youngsters to spend an hour or two with the mother and father and the superintendent and anyone else you want to bring in, and then finally say, you've convinced me, we're going to do, thank you. Or, no. And that's that, rather than begin to itemize it or say, it is or it is, that's what it is, no. So that's my opinion now.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm just going to speak as somebody in the policy subcommittee because we had a pretty big debate about this paragraph 3. And my thought is what you're saying, Terry, and then consulting with Melissa, that we were just talking about a small group of kids, and we just decided, or at least most of us in the policy subcommittee decided that we could do this on a case-by-case, that we didn't have to outline every possible scenario. So a majority of the subcommittee decided that this was okay. So that's just my comments. Go ahead, Sharon.
So, of course, there are 3 on our policy committee.
Yep.
So you know who didn't. So, I don't see any problem in adding a sentence in this saying that masked children and masked other children in the classroom or other people in the classroom will be protected by a space of 15 feet. It clearly, in all the research that I've read, this is the American Pediatric, this is the New England, I don't know what the New England is, very Harvard Education, they're all saying that it's 3 hours and 13 or 16 feet. There's a little discrepancy there, but that's being stated. The other thing is that that COVID-19 in children has increased 90% in this last 1 month. So we cannot, we did this other survey that children and that families did that said 21% of children or someone in their household had a serious illness. Statewide, I've read in some things that it's 25 to 30% of teachers. This is a serious thing. To me, we need to put something in here that will clearly protect other people. We can't allow, I mean, parents, if they run around to enough physicians, they'll find somebody to write their kid something. And I do want something in here to try to not allow all that to happen, or at least to protect the children.
Okay, so before I call on Joe, and I guess, Sharon, I would just say as a rebuttal that, in the paragraph, I mean, it reads, must be approved by the building principal in consultation with the school nurse. I feel like, we're getting too specific, that's just me, because I trust the principal with the school nurse, the local board. I feel like some of those, what you're talking about, can be determined in those conversations rather than us coming up with various scenarios. That's just how I feel about it.
I know, but schools pressured the scientific research to open up, and for parents, I don't know who pressured, but anyway, originally it was 6 feet was the distance that was acceptable. And because schools didn't have, Monomoy very fortunately has the 6 feet, but because schools didn't have the 6 feet, they moved it down to 3 feet. There was no scientific anything for that. That there was just pressure. I'm saying that pressure will come. I'm trying to protect these people that you're trying to allow decisions. I'm trying to protect principals and superintendents and people from having to deal with this all the time by putting something in there that makes it more clear.
Okay,
This
and
is
before I
not
call,
against,
okay, I'm gonna call in the superintendent, and Joe, I'll come to you in 1 minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I feel as the policy's written, I feel very well protected in terms of decisions I'd have to make. I also, just I sent out an email to families about masks. I have gotten a whopping total of 1 email back, just asking for some sort of modification, and I responded very simply back, no, this is, you could do a face shield and, a 2-ply cotton mask. I'm fine with that, but, face shield, no. And, I've had a member of staff ask for some, different thing, and the answer was no. We're not seeing this flood of people wanting something different. The parents, if you put yourself in the parents' shoes, the parents want to protect their child too. And I think the parents who have elected for in-person learning want their child protected. They want to see their child wearing a mask just as much as I think we want to see the child wearing a mask. So it's, so I think we're sort of arguing about something that's relatively moot, and I think the provisions that are in there on plexiglass shielding and things like that are, I think, adequate to protect those and the individuals that this policy may be referring to are some of our students in, I would say potentially in an intensive needs type of situation. And we have provisions for staff to be protected with appropriate PPE given the students that they might be working with. So, so I do think the policy is fine as written.
Okay, thank you. And Joe, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually, I needn't say anything. The superintendent said a little better than what I was thinking or trying to say, so no need for me to repeat. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing that most of us are okay with the 3rd paragraph as written. And then Joe just had a couple of grammatical things in one of the paragraphs and then asked for an example. Does everyone in the violations of this policy by staff, do you feel like you need for us, or are you comfortable with adding an example there? Do you need an example? Terry?
I don't.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, so with that, I think we would be okay. We'll just make the grammatical, the little bit of cleanup that Joe recommended, and this can come back for a vote on the 10th. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on with the superintendent's report.
Let's see, I'll be as brief as possible, just in terms of the evolution of the superintendent's own thinking. So as we went into the summer, late June, I was of the gator ilk. So I purchased, in Colorado, the Air Force Academy Gator, but the Gator research set that one to the side. Then I had purchased the mask with vent until the CDC came out with mask with vent, a no-no, because it protects you, the user, but not protecting others. And what we've been trying to emphasize as a district is our mask policy is something to protect oneself and to protect others. That's how we're going to be thinking about safety in our schools. So I sent out to families an email about gaiters and vents and bandanas and Joy came up with a nice little graphic to sort of guide people on their mask choices. And as I said, we had, I received one email back from a parent, asking what if, and one email from a staff member. So I do think that, that we can do this, and I think we've got a lot of support from the families behind that. Second to last thing, I went and have been working. We've secured some rapid antibody tests for COVID, and I'll be working with our nurses. I'll be talking with them tomorrow. Our departments of health. And our school district doctor, and we'll put together a COVID testing clinic prior to our school year getting kicked off. Where we'll explain what the test does, but it's a very cost-effective screener for the district that gets paired with if one tests positive. They get immediately referred for it's called a PCR test. It's the infamous nasal swab. So these tests are just a very simple pinprick on one's finger, one drop of blood. Minutes later, you have a very reliable, if you haven't been exposed, if you have been exposed, a follow-up test that our school physician or one's primary care can go and make that recommendation to have that PCR test, and our health insurance would cover the costs of that. But again, just to make sure that all of our staff have the peace of mind going into the school year, knowing have they ever been exposed or not. And as the year goes on, we'll have these available in case there needs to be that peace of mind, or they think that I might have been exposed, and this can go and answer that. The state has also been ramping up on their end testing capabilities for schools. The commissioner just put out an email, I believe today, about if there's a cluster that happens, they'll have sort of a rapid response, sort of to have a pop-up testing clinic that would be more along the lines of the PCR test that can go and sort of wrap around who might be exposed. And again, I think if we want to keep the schools open, I think that combination of testing and making sure that we're staying home if sick will facilitate us being open. And then last but not least, I was invited to speak this morning on the point with Mindy Todd on school reopening. And, so I was chiming in on what our reopening plan is. And then just, I may have gone on my own little monologue on just how important I think in-person learning is. And just shared my, my own experiences watching my own children with in-person learning, and just, sort of acknowledge that, they have two well-educated parents that, that were lucky enough during this to, to have a parent who, was working from home, because of the nature of their job. I could distance, distance function at times. And, so they were well supported with their learning. But as I've mentioned to many, one of my next door neighbors who is very fond of Miss Gushy over there, has parents that, that need to work hard, to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table, and didn't have jobs that they could do remotely. And, so you have a second grader who's trying to distance learn, and, I would say it wasn't a great, second half of the school year, despite, I know what Cindy was trying to do remotely, and what, what a teacher was trying to do remotely for a child who's having to navigate the remote by themselves. And I've also shared with some that I have a foster daughter who's stepped into my life, who comes from off-Cape urban school district, who hasn't interacted with a teacher since the beginning of March. And so I was just mentioning in my sort of rant on the point this morning, just how important I think it is that we have this in-person option, because I think we've got a strategic objective to close achievement gaps, and I do worry that some of our most vulnerable in our school community and throughout this country are getting left behind, and gaps are widening when we have distance learning happen. I think, I've shared with in every parent meeting, distance learning can be a good thing, but you need the right scenario at home, and you need that that parent support to have distance learning happen. You need to have ideally a very self-motivated learner for distance learning to happen, and if that's not in place, that in-person would be better. And as I said, I asked the principals to triage that list. Who's elected for distance learning, and if we feel that there are some that are on that list who would be better served in person to have a conversation, to reinforce with families that what we're doing to make in-person learning safe, and hopefully have gaps not widen. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments on the superintendent's report? All right, seeing none, we will move into action items. We've done the first two. So FY20 prior year invoices in your packet. You've got all of that. Could I have a motion? It looks vote required. So could I have a motion to accept this? Any
Ask a
questions?
Do we need to do them individually or as one?
That's a good question.
I can't remember.
I don't recall.
Individually?
Individually?
Can we do one vote?
Yeah.
One vote, just read out each individual line item? Madam Chair,
Thank you.
I move to approve the prior year invoices from A1 Exterminators in the amount of $18, Bosco Industrial, $932.60, another Bosco Industrial of $440, Coastal Engineering, $1,842.08, another Coastal Engineering for $2,675, Justice Resource Institute, $2,562.21, a second Justice Resource Institute for $8,825.39. A third Justice Resource Institute for $8,256.01. Pacific Interpreters for $106.60. And to the town of Chatham for a total of $772.94, for a grand total of prior year invoices of $26,412.83.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Meredith seconded. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, we're going to take a roll call vote. We'll start in the Zoom room. Joe?
Yes?
Sharon?
Aye.
Meredith?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so that's unanimous. And the presentation of warrants, we have all been signing. It's kind of nice to be back to that. And public comment. Anybody from the public like to speak? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Terry seconded. Roll call vote again, starting in the Zoom room. Joe?
Yes?
Sharon?
Aye.
Meredith?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Terry?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, and we will adjourn at 9:01 PM. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you back in 3 weeks.